Yeah, so this is just a little bit of what I'm doing right now for my book project. So this is just a little part of it, right? So I just wanted to give you an overview of where today's talk fits, right, within that book, or what will be a book. So it's called Writing of People, Indigenous Politics, Agency, and Identity in 16th Century Huexotzingo. So in general, in the book, I'm examining, right, it's a case study, right, that draws from political, legal, right, social engagement of the people of Huexotzingo, the Nahua people of Huexotzingo, who wrote a lot, right? The central theme, right, it's the texts they produce, texts that were legal in nature, right? They were administrative. They're not necessarily the big histories, right, that we mostly know from, the well-known historians of the time, right? So this is more of how people think of themselves while interacting with the Spanish colonial system, right? It is interdisciplinary, right? A lot of it is ethnohistory because I'm dealing with archival documents and I have to contextualize them, right, in the period where they're produced and the circumstances where they come up. It is cultural studies, right? This is a study of how these people, right, how they see themselves, how they react, how they express themselves within those historical circumstances. And Nahua studies, right, because I'm focusing on this specific ethnic group. So the main point in the book is to center Indigenous perspectives and context, right? So even though a lot of these documents, right, they were produced within the Spanish colonial context, right? A lot of them were part of bigger processes, right, that had to do with Spanish administration. So oftentimes we don't necessarily get to see what's hidden, right, what's in these texts. We know the codices, right, the visual, right, the luxurious, right, paintings that a lot of these people produced, but we don't really get to see sometimes what they were doing, what they were thinking, when they were engaging, right, in the legal and the political elements. Can I get the next one? So to situate ourselves, right, in the space, in the geography. So Huexotzinco, it's a locality that's in the Puebla Tlaxcala Valley, east of what's today Mexico City. So here we have, right, Tenochtitlan, Tlatelolco, the so-called Aztecs, right? They didn't call themselves Aztecs back in the day, right? They called themselves Mexica, right? Or Mexica, Tenochca, or Tlatelolca. Right? Remember that? Take notes. So Tlaxcala here, because I'm a Quasi. So right here, right, we have the Tlaxcala Valley, Huexotzingo, right? One of these provinces, Tlaxcala, Cholula, right? So the major groups that were around at that time. And then just, for the sake of, being a little clearer in the present day, right? So Huexotzingo is this red blob right here. Mexico City is right here. And then you get an idea of where we are. This is the Gulf of Mexico, Veracruz, right? Puebla. So we are east of the Central Valley, right? Can I get the next one? So just to give you an idea of how I'm working, right, with the book, it's a close reading and discourse analysis of Huexotzincan author texts, right, of the texts that were written by the indigenous people of Huexotzinco. So we have codices, right? Have four major ones that I know of, that I've seen. Códice de Huexotzingo, Matrícula de Huexotzinco, Códice Guillermo Tovar de Huexotzingo, and Códice Chavero de Huexotzinco, so you're sure that they are all from Huexotzingo, right? These are were all produced in the 16th century. They're housed in different libraries here in the US, in Paris, and in Mexico. They're also administrative and legal documents. And like I mentioned before, we have city council letters, so the city council that administrated Huexotzingo, like the city itself. We have land documents, we have wills, ecclesiastical documentation, right, that had to do with their relationship with the ecclesiastical government. What else? Oh, and these documents are very interesting because they're not only the visual part, right, that we see here, and this is a portion of the Huexotzinco Codex of 1531. And here we have what's part of it, what contextualizes this document, right? For example, this was part of a lawsuit between Hernán Cortés and the Primera Audiencia, the first high court. They were fighting over Huexotzinco, right, to put it in short terms. And 3 Huexotzincan men testified in this process. Here we have the declaration by Esteban, right? Esteban Indio que antes se decía Tuchel, so his previous name, his name in Nahua was Tuchel. So we don't necessarily see, right, these declarations, these names coming out right from the Huexotzinco Codex. Most of the work that's been done, it's been done on that, plate, lámina, right, in Spanish. So my goal here with the book, right, is to see what else is there, right? What do we see when we go into the legal processes that gave origin, right, to those documents. The next one. Okay, so this is the analytical part. So we do have to work with concepts, right, to help us think through these documents. So I have Layers of Meaning by art historian Barbara Mundy, and she tells us that indigenous actors created layers, right? They were moving through spaces, right, places, actions, and created social spaces, right? So in my interpretation or in my use of the term, the people of Huexotzinco embodied different layers, right? So these layers were those political markers that were placed upon them, right? or that they already embodied. For example, I have Altepet, which was their basic organizational unit. Sometimes it's translated as city-state or town or city, depending on the document. We have, you probably already know encomienda, right? The grant that Spanish, mostly Spanish men, or mostly Spanish people receive to get labor and tribute payments from indigenous communities, although some indigenous, right, elite members also receive encomiendas. We have things like congregación, the units where they were reorganized, right, to be able to receive religious instruction. Pueblo, like town, right, ciudad, city. So all these different layers that crossed Huexotzinco. The next one. And then we have subjectivity of belonging. So it's a mix of terms, pretty much taken from Stuart Hall and Sherry B. Ordner. What a subject, right, or what an actor, right, what they feel, what they think, right, what they desire, fear within, right, these what Stuart Hall calls culture within this system of control, right, that it's culture for him. So how they deal, right, with the culture around them. So for Huexotzinco, right, how the people create a subjectivity of belonging, right, while being part of the Spanish imperial project. Next one. Okay, and today's focus is the moral economy, right? So I take this from E.P. Thompson, originally The Moral Economy of the Poor, right, in the context of 17th century England and the food riots around the production of bread, right? So he tells us that it's a popular consensus as to what were legitimate and what were illegitimate practices in marketing, milling, baking, etc., grounded upon a consistent traditional view of social norms and obligations, of the proper economic functions of several parties within the community. And we have also social stratification, right? So more than a theoretical concept, right? Social stratification, it's a recurring idea or a recurring notion, right? In these documents, it is also a central part of indigenous social organization since the prehispanic period. It's been extensively studied, it's been analyzed. So I base this part of the book, right, of the work, on these two ideas. So basically, the pre-Hispanic notions of socioeconomic organizations that were used in the colonial era. So, for example, two major things about the social stratification in the Nahua people, at least. So there was the major alphabet, like the city-state, the big town, and then there were regional and local subdivisions, right? Each one of these levels had a leader, right? So we have the governor, and then we have the local lords, right? And then under these lords, right, in these subdivisions, we have the commoners, common people, Macehualtin, or the Spanish form Macehuales, who lived in each local division, sometimes called barrio in Spanish, also called calpuli in Nahuatl, organized usually in groups of 20 workers, right? So it was organized around labor, right? Of these groups, like the important ones, or the ones that concern me the most, because it's very interesting what they do with them, it's the terrazgueros, right? So these people, right, this subgroup within the commoners, right, they rented land from the nobles, right, and they paid them tribute in kind and in money. So, with all this, we have the moral economy of the Huexotzincan elite, right? So I'm trying to use the part of the reasons, right, the reasoning behind a moral approach to the economic function of the alphabet, right? So it rests on the principle that commoners, right, should not be mistreated, should not be burdened with a lot of work, that should not be, or should not have to pay a lot of tribute, right? So that they could contribute to the local economy, but also so that they could uphold the status of the nobility, right? Next. So I have two main questions. There might be more that come along the way because this is a work in progress. But basically, what were the socioeconomic dynamics in Huexotzinco, right? So just to clear that up, how do they work? How do they organize themselves? How do they see themselves as an alphabet, right? As a big unit, divided, right, in different strata. And how did the writers, right, of these documents deploy a moral economy through social stratification, and to what end? Right? What's the purpose? Next. So, to me, right, this idea or the notion, right, this practice of social stratification, it's a tool. It's a tool to negotiate the Huexotzincan standing, right, their position in the colonial world, right? They do this in their documents, right? Since they're, legal in nature, they're political, they will be deploying these notions of social stratification to get to a goal. Basically what I just said. So, to uphold Huexotzinco status, right? And to uphold Huexotzinco status meant to uphold the status of the nobility, right? So mainly, that's where they get at. And also it has to do with the fact that Huexotzinco was granted the title of Ciudad de Indios, right? So it meant that they were being recognized by the Spanish crown for their service in the conquest, right? So they also, in other parts of the book, in other parts of my research, right, I address these conquest histories where Huexotzincan people, right, they helped in these conquests, either providing like goods and products, right, for conquest campaigns. They were soldiers, right? They went out to northwestern Mexico, right, and fought with other indigenous people, right, just like other indigenous people did, right? The Mayan, the people from Tlaxcala, right? They all, right, were in this moment of, just fighting for their lives, and if that meant, right, allying themselves with the Spaniards, then that's what they did. So that's where they get the title of ciudad, and with that title comes, or there were supposed to come, a bunch of benefits, right? For example, for the nobility to not pay tribute, to be able to have their own indigenous government, and also to not to be under the dominion of the Spanish crown rather than a local Spanish lord, like an implementer, right? So just, for context, because with these documents, right, we have to know, right, where they're coming from and how they come about. So these are basically originated in political battles over tribute assessments. So most of these codices, right, they are a product of a previous conflict, right? Mostly about tribute and against the Spaniards. So I see that their identity, it's based, or one of the ways in which they construct their collective identity, is through these two categories, right? The Macehualtin, or the Pipiltin, right? The commoners and the nobility. And what's very interesting is how they deploy these categories, mostly for the Macehuales, or Macehualtin, right? They are very specific about who they are and what they do, right? They are, there are hunters, there are fishermen, there are lots of laborers, right, who provide service to the city and fulfill a role. So one of my points is that the Huexotzincan elite acted in representation of the Altepet as a whole, right, because they are the ones, driving these political battles, right? They're the ones going up to the court, right, and fighting because they have that privilege, right? So they were either, the litigants, the witnesses, they were government officials, they wrote these texts, right? However, commoners, even if they were not the ones signing, right, a declaration or signing a petition, a letter, they are still the unseen and unheard agents, right, who set these socioeconomic functions, right, in motion. Next. Okay, so the documents, right? So right now, or for this talk, I'm just gonna focus on three, and probably just breeze through them because it's a lot. But one of them is the Matrícula de Huexotzingo. So this is the most well-known part of this document, right? It's the pictographic part. It's a census, a population census that breaks down the population, right, between Macehualtin and Pipiltin, right, the commoners and the nobility. But it's originated in a legal conflict, right, about tribute. So this came about because during this time, it's 1560. So in the mid 15th century, the Spanish crown is trying to, raise the revenue, right? So they're, doing more tribute charges, and there's a trail of documentation, where they're going back and forth, assessing the amounts, assessing, right, how many people live there, how much are they going to pay. So there was a big race, right, around this time. And so the Huexotzinca City Council, right, the governmental body in Huexotzingo, they go up to the court and they complain, right, that they're getting too much tribute, right, assessed. So the whole of the Matrícula of Huexotzingo, I think it's about 800 pages. Like, it's a fat document, and it's not only the pictographic part, it's also the legal record where we find declarations and petitions by indigenous leaders, right, asking the audiencia, the High Court, to lower the treaty, right? And they give a bunch of reasons why they should lower it. And this is where the the moral economy comes in. Right, can I get the next one? So very quickly, one of the things that the Matricula Huexotzingo does, it's break down the population not only between Macehualtin and Pipiltin, but also geographically or geopolitically, right, by the different divisions, right, the Subaltepec within the main Altepec, right, within the main city. So for example, we have the central region, right, the head of the region is San Juan Huexotzingo, right, or Huexotzingo, and then the barrio, like the another subdivision, San Juan Huexotzingo, Santiago Xaltepetlapan, and all these barrios, right? Next one, please. Same to other regions, right? Less, as you can see, the difference in importance, right? In amount of barrios, and therefore in the amount of inhabitants. So we have Texmolocan, another cabecera in the north, and the one in the south, Huacholan, and then the respective barrios and respective population of Macehualtin and Pipiltin. Can I get the next one? And I'm not gonna go into too much into detail about the numbers and all of that, but this is pretty much how it went down. So we have the pictographic census, right? They gave us a number of 13,061, and then they eliminate some groups, right? The people who are dead, of course, because they can't pay, and those who just left town. They call them huidos, like those who escaped, right? So it goes down to 11,193, but then, right, the Spanish functionaries come in and they do a recount of this population, right? And based on the census. So what happened? The indigenous people of Huexotzingo, they produced this massive census, right, by each town. Like all of the towns that we saw, right, they created pictures, right, the pictographic visuals for each one, okay? So they took this census and kind of reorganized it and reshuffled it according to the categories, right, that worked for them. So they came up with a total of 11,428 people, right, who were supposed to pay tribute. And then comes a Spanish judge, Diego de Madrid, who was in charge of the whole case, of overseeing the case. And he came up with 11,316 and 11,318. So there's a difference, right? A little bit of a difference in the final amounts, right, by a couple hundred people. So we can see that they were trying to keep it lower, and then they were trying to keep it a little bit higher, right? Can I get the next one? So here's where the petition comes in, what this whole case, right, comes about. So the signatories, the people who presented the petition, were part of the city council. Pedro de San Francisco, Antonio Turcios, Diego Juárez, Pedro García, y Leonardo Ramírez, and they pretty much request, right, in the name of the city of Huexotzingo, right, and for the power that they have, right, and in the name of all the people in the province and their people, right, so they represent Huexotzingo, right, at the court. So they present the reasons why the group of terrasgueros, those who rent the lands from the nobles, they shouldn't be counted as tributaries. So that's the main issue here. That they're counting this specific group of commoners, right? So that means if they're counting them, they're gonna have to pay tribute to the crown. Look at the next one, please. So this is the list of reasons, right? They're in Spanish. That's where another thing, right? The document, it is written in Spanish, right? Declarations were taken, translators were used, right? So we do have to keep that in mind, right? But that doesn't mean, right? That it's all a lie and that, this is not true, right? When you see the different argumentations, the different points that they make, right? You can kind of tell that they are really working for their own purposes, right? Not for the purposes of the crown. So, for example, one of these reasons, right? They won't be able to, fulfill all these obligations. They're already working, and if they're, overworked and they have to pay all this, they're gonna go to Tlaxcala where they have better lands, where they will be able to, live better. Se irán donde puedan ser más relevados, right? Where they can be relieved of tribute, right? Work. Another reason, the terrasgueros and other tributaries, they've been busy, right, taking care of the church and the monastery of Huexotzingo, right? So this is a little bit of the ecclesiastical part, right? The relationship that they have with the church and that they work also for the church, right? So they have these responsibilities, and because they haven't even been able to build their own houses, they have a lot of tribute to pay, so they can't be counted, right? They should not be in the census. They should not be considered tributaries, right? Next one. So, just an example of what it looks like, right? So we have a list of Pipitin. This is from the barrio de San Gregorio, so one of the many barrios in Huexotzingo, in the whole province. And as I said, we have lists for each of these barrios, so these are a lot. And then this is a list of Macehualtin from San Juan Huexotzingo. So one of the interesting things that comes out, and that even the petition writers, right, the indigenous writers point out, is that they have signaled with a red dot who the terrasgueros are, right? So that it's clear to these Spanish functionaries who these people are and that they should not be counted, right? So if you see someone with the red dot, he doesn't count, right? He's a terrasguero, he should not be paying tribute. And then we have the actual. This is the Spanish version, right, of the census. So the information that the Spanish functionaries took from here and translated into here, and then kind of like reshuffled it to suit the amounts that they wanted to get, right? So they did count the terrasgueros, right? They did count other people that are indigenous actors, right? They didn't want to count. Next one. So that's that with the Matricola de Huexotzingo, and as you may guess, they didn't get what they wanted, right? So this is why they write this letter, right? This is a very famous letter because it's written in Nahua, right? It's not written in Spanish, wholly Nahua, and it's addressed to the Spanish king, Felipe II. So this letter from the city council, right? It's a long letter that was also intended to request, right, lower tribute rates, right, because they hadn't been fulfilled in the previous case, right? And it's lengthy. I think it's about 6 pages, probably 5 or 6 pages long, front and back. And they detail, right, how they have served the king, how they have helped in the conquest, and it's been about 30 years, 40, 50 years from the period of the initial conquest, right? And they tell the king, we have helped, right? We received Hernan Cortés, we loved him, we were, but you gotta understand that they're trying to get this, tribute rates lowered, so you're gonna be nice to the person you're asking for this, right? So you're gonna tell them that you've been doing everything you were supposed to do. And then the next one, please. So this is yet another petition, right? They didn't get what they wanted in the previous case. So for example, right, they address the king and they present themselves to the king. we of Huexotzingo, who guard for you, your city, we citizens, I the governor, and we the alcaldes, and regidores, so these are functionaries from the council, and we the lords and nobles, your men and your servants, right? So they're telling us who they are, or they're telling the king who they are, right? And they also position themselves as servants to the king, right? As vassals to the king. So the conflict, right? What's the problem? We are afflicted and sore pressed, and your Altepet and city of Huexotzingo is as if it is about to crumble and disappear. Here is what is happening to us. Now your stewards, the royal officials, and Attorney Dr. Maldonado are assessing us a very great tribute to belong to you. Luis de Maldonado, right, he's also mentioned in the previous case as the one being signing all these like approvals, right, for raising the tribute. So, they are complaining again, like this is happening, and they keep raising the tribute. And then, for them, right, this means that the elite is in danger. Nobility is seen among us no longer. Now we resemble the commoners as they eat and dress so little. And they go back to their prehispanic customs, right? They cite them as reasons and why they should be let off the hook with the tribute. Our fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers knew no tribute and gave tribute to no one who were independent. Right? So in the pre-Hispanic period, Huexotzingo was its own city-state, right? They were one of the great powers, often not mentioned, right, in favor of Tlaxcala, right? That's the more popular one because they were the traders and they allied themselves with the Spaniards, which is true. But the Huexotzinca were also, right, one of those great powers who later on, right, were allies of the Spaniards. So that meant, right, that they had no tributary submission to another city-state. As you know, the Mexica, the Aztecs, right, they did receive tribute, right, from other localities, right? So Huexotzingo was not one of them. Can I get the next one? So that's that with that petition. I'll have to move on to the next one, but the point here is that they make these claims, right, putting themselves at the center while also claiming, right, to advocate for the poorer commoners, right? They should not be paying tribute. If you raise their tribute, right, they won't be able to pay, and they won't be able to pay us, right? And if we have to pay tribute, we'll be like them, right? We'll be poor and we'll be like commoners. And if that happens, Huexotzingo is going to disappear. Your city, right? The one city that you made yours, right, by decree. So this also should concern the king, right? Then we have the Códice Chavero de Huexotzingo. This is another legal case, right, that came, and this is very interesting because it comes because of mismanagement of money and resources by the council members themselves, like indigenous council members who served between 1571 and 1577, so it's, 6 years of, just bad expenses and a lot of accusations. So the members from 1578, they caught, right, in their tribute documentation that numbers didn't add up, that there was something wrong. And so to them, right, this was evidence of inappropriate tribute charges and expenses. They were charging tribute in advance, like a year in advance. They were spending money on parties and fancy clothes and things like that were not right, and therefore they were abusing the commoners, right, who were the ones who paid for it. So can I get the next one? So again, we have another judge, right, Juan de Figueroa, and he is assigned to investigate the case. He gets testimonies, right? So that's what happens when we have any legal problem, or we get a judge, and then they get their translator, right, because they need to communicate with indigenous population. They get witnesses, they ask for paper evidence, right, physical evidence of what happened of these claims. So for example, he reports, right, in his investigation report, they were glad that His Majesty sent them a judge to investigate such affair for the common good of the naturales and residents of the city, so that they would not have to pay the tribute that they had already paid, nor be affected by imprisonment or the sale of their goods, with which they wanted to leave, like some others have done, to Tlaxcala and Cholula, right? So according to the judge, the feeling was that, yeah, they were happy to be, in this investigation because they didn't want to, right, have to pay for what the previous cohorts of council members had spent inappropriately. And then we have statements, and this is a long case. I'm not gonna give you, all the statements, all the details, because these are statements by all the cabildo members, right? A lot of questions. So we have some pieces of evidence that tells us, what the problem is and how they are using, right, these differences in social, right, groups to drive their points. So, for example, these city council officials, they said that their zeal in notifying the audiencia, the High Court, was because of their Christian heart sympathizing with the Macehuales and Naturales of Huexotzinco and its subjects, so that they would not pay and spend what they had already paid in advance, and so that they, as cabildo members or city council members, would not be asked for the money that past officials had spent eating and drinking and going to church and Naturales earlier. Can we get the next one? So, another declaration, right? They had to confirm whether the other accused, right, council members presented false documentation, and the witnesses respond, their malice is clear because they record expenses they have made with Spaniards and judges, and they mix with them with those for the churches. The witnesses clearly understand it was only their intention and deed to steal from the Republic, keeping its assets and even His Majesty's money, burdening the Macehuales with labor. Right, so again, they are messing with the Macehuales, they're making them work, they're making them pay for their own inappropriate, right, things. And then one other counselor, Luis del Castillo, he points out that many times he stopped to think how the accused, how they went out dressed with velvet tunics, new boots, and good clothing in the Spanish style for the Feast of San Miguel, without earning rents nor Indian vassals, and he imagined that it came from the poor Macehuales, as he has seen from experience. Right, so the indigenous cabildo city council members were accused, right, of doing some incorrect spending. Right, they are dressing like Spaniards. Right, they are trying to embody this status, right, as elites, because they can dress, right, for them, right, they can dress in the Spanish style, which was not generally, right, allowed. There was legislation on it. I think there was also the possibility of petitioning, right, for being able to wear these clothes. But mostly, right, it was about displaying their status as elites. But they were doing it according to the witnesses, right, on the on the backs, right, of these Macehuales, on their work, right, and they were not respecting, right, that group. Next one. So to wrap this up, right? So in my view, what I'm exploring right now, right, it's that these arguments, right, these like emotionally charged at times, right? These points about the Macehuales are being mistreated either by Spanish authorities because they're charging them lots of tribute, or by indigenous, officials as well, because they are, misappropriating money and they are making them work more, right? yes, it seems like they're advocating, right, for the indigenous commoners, right? And it's a moral stance on how, right, the economy and how these social groups should be treated. But it's also used, right, for the ultimate purpose for these elites to stay elites, right? To keep their positions, to not pay more than what they should be paying, so that the people who work for them, for example, the terrasgueros in the matrícula of Huexotzingo, will be able to keep working for them, right? So that they don't have to be paying tribute to the crown, but to them, right? So it's a complex position, right? The indigenous elites in Huexotzingo and perhaps in many other localities, right? They're in this in-between space because yes, they are elites, they're indigenous elites, they are like the upper hand in their city, but they're also part of the Spanish monarchy, right? They also have to respond to the crown, right? They have to interact with the audiencia, with the high court, with the judges, right? So they're still in this kind of level of subalternity, right, within the larger Spanish colonial context, right? So depending on where they're standing, right, who they're talking to, they embody different positions, right? So in the end, right, I think the Huexotzincan people, the people of Huexotzingo, they create these forms of belonging, right? They belong to, their own community, right? They are indigenous leaders, right? But they're also part of this bigger, like, world, right? Even if they're faced with resistance from the Spanish government or the Spanish crown, it's based, right, on these relationships with the administration, with their own people, and they draw from these relationships, right, to confront the situations of people, and whatever they may be. And I just wanted to point out, right, that I mentioned the city status, right, the ciudad status. So with that, they received a coat of arms, right, which they display in different documents. So it's a form of using that status to, right, legitimize what they're doing. Right, in their official documentation, there's the coat of arms, right, or a representation of it. They represent themselves as the city of Huexotzingo, right, the ciudad, the place that belongs to the king, right? So in all, what I seek to do, what I'm aiming to do, right, it's just to give a more varied, right, multi-level understanding of what was the indigenous experience, right, in the colonial period. It's not uniform, right? We have people who were in better positions, especially the descendants, right, of people like Moctezuma, right, who received encomiendas. We have the famous Tlaxcalans, right, who received, or apparently received more benefits, and that's something that the Huexotzinco people always complain about. They were always complaining about Tlaxcala, who were, or people who were, more challenged, right, and they had to struggle more and ask for more, right. So the purpose here is to give that picture, right, to give those variations, those different, shades of color, right, in this situation. And with that, that's the last one.